Hi, I'm Pastor Dale with Declaration Church, and today I was thinking about a number of different things after reading this particular verse that we're going to talk about today in Genesis chapter 15. And there's a lot of stuff that comes through my mind when I start to read through these things, and video ideas start to pop into my head. But there's this family favorite movie in my household that maybe you're familiar with, maybe you're not. It's kind of a cult classic, and it's called The Princess Bride, and it's a great movie. It's my wife's ultimate favorite movie of all time. She loves this movie, and all of us as a family really enjoy this movie. And there are a number of places in the movie where there are some one-liners, some great movie lines that are just hilarious or intriguing, thought-provoking. And there's one scene where the main antagonist or the main protagonist is fighting against what will at some point later in the movie become an ally and a friend, and they are sword fighting. And the main protagonist does an amazing acrobatic move, and this other swordsman looks at him and says, "Who are you?" And he says, "No one of consequence." And this is, "I must know." And this is the line: get used to disappointment. Get used to disappointment. And that line resonates with me today because I feel like that is something that we tell each other, we tell our friends, we tell our families, we tell our kids, we tell anyone that will listen as we grow older and we mature. Get used to disappointment, because every single one of us has encountered a situation where we were promised something, where we were offered something, where we were just presented with this incredible scenario that really got us excited, and then it never happened. It never came to pass. It just went by the wayside. Somebody broke a promise. Some circumstance arose that made that now impossible to get done. Something happened to bring that beautiful dream crashing down to earth and laying on the ground in pieces. It leaves us broken and shattered. And in that moment, I think so often we are told by those around us, who many of whom have gone before us and are more mature, have more life experience, to get used to disappointment. And so we begin to callous ourselves against these things actually happening. So when someone promises us something, when someone gives us this beautiful picture, paints a beautiful dream for us, and says, this is what's going to happen, we kind of take those things with a grain of salt, so to speak. We are skeptical. And I think for the most part, as the human race, we are a gigantic population of skeptics. We are skeptical of everything, to the point where when we see a commercial, we wonder what they're not telling us. When we watch some amazing thing happen, a video of some great miracle taking place, we wonder what the catch is. What's the trick? What is really happening there? Clearly, they must be fraudulent in what they're presenting me, because we have been disappointed so many times in our lives that we have almost come to the point, I think most of us, where we expect promises to be broken. We expect devastation, and it leads to a severe lack of trust, which damages our interpersonal relationships to the point where intimacy is almost impossible. And for some of us, it is impossible, because we would rather leave ourselves protected and maintain relational distance than leave ourselves vulnerable to more disappointment. We have gotten used to disappointment, and it devastates us in so many ways. But the biggest one is that lack of trust in relationship. And we carry that over so many times into our relationship with God. And it hinders our relationship with God. It hinders our growth in our relationship with God. And it hinders our advancement into the abundant life that Jesus says he came to bring us. It's devastating. And it hurts us so much. And yet, in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, we are presented with an example for us that should begin to break those preconceptions down. Genesis chapter 15, God presents Abram with a promise, with a covenant relationship. He establishes a covenant between himself and Abram, who will later become Abraham. He gets his name changed by God. And God tells him in verse 5, look toward heaven. Look up in the sky. Look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. We estimate the number of the stars. We have no idea exactly how many there are, but we estimate how many stars are in the sky. So he says, look toward heaven and number the stars if you're able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Now this is a promise given to a man who has no children, whose wife is barren and he is old. It's estimated he's somewhere around 90 years old at this point when he's given this promise from God. And yet, with all of the circumstances in his life, just making it seem like this promise could never happen, that there's no way this is going to be done, that God is just feeding him a line to keep him obedient and drag him along. We find in verse 6 this statement. And he, being Abram, believed the Lord. He believed Yahweh. And he counted it, God, the Lord, counted it to him, Abram, as righteousness. You see, the basis of our relationship with God is trust. Now, we call it faith in a lot of different arenas and a lot of different instances, but it's really not any different. Belief, faith, trust, they all together encompass this whole idea of what it means to believe God together. You can't believe what God says and not move forward in trust. No, trusting that what he says is going to come about. Abram does. That's what separates him. He doesn't just say, oh, okay, yep, that sounds great, and then move on and go, I don't know, we'll see, I guess. Maybe God will come through. No, there's a level of trust involved in this statement. He doesn't just believe God on the surface. He doesn't just put forth an air of belief. He completely believes that what God has told him is absolutely 100% true, and there's no way that it won't happen. He has complete trust in God, and from there, his relationship with God will grow and grow and grow. And we see the hiccups. We see the little speed bumps along the way where he doesn't trust God to protect him when he's living in a foreign land. And so he lies to the leaders there and lies to the people there about his wife being his sister and not his wife. He does it twice. And we see the little hiccups and the little problems where it just, he moves forward with a plan that is not God's to try and help God's plan along. And it brings about all kinds of other issues and all kinds of other problems. But we get to a point where God brings about this promise and answers and fulfills this promise in full, 100% with the birth of Isaac, his son, by his wife, Sarah. And then years down the road, years go by, and God says, take your son, your only son, Isaac, and sacrifice him to me. And Abram gets up the very next morning, early in the morning, gathers his son, gathers what they need, gathers some servants to help them along the way, and starts the journey to where God has told him to build the altar and sacrifice his son, never doubting that God will do what he says he will do and bring about a multitude of offspring so great that no one could count from Isaac. Because that's what God had told him. And he never actually ends up sacrificing his son because God stops him and provides provides a substitutionary sacrifice, prophetic to you and I of what he would do in the future with Jesus. But God doesn't fail to keep his promise. And he never fails to keep his promises to you and I. He will always fulfill his promise because God is always faithful, because it's a part of who he is. It's a part of his identity. It's built into his character. He is the promise keeper. He is faithful, and he will always keep his word. So when God gives us a promise, we can take that to the bank. It's not like when our parents told us as kids that they were going to take us to Disneyland and never did. It's not like that. It's not like that neighbor saying that they're going to pay for half of the fence between your house and their house, and they never do. It's not like that. God always fulfills his promises. God is trustworthy, and so we can trust him no matter what it is. No matter how outlandish it may seem, no matter how far-fetched his promise may sound, he will bring it to pass because he is faithful and he does not ever fail to bring about his promise and to fulfill his word. He always does. And so you can trust him 100% explicitly, fully with everything in your life. God is trustworthy. And he loves you, and you can trust that. And so I hope that brings you comfort and encouragement, and maybe even challenges you a little bit to inspect and kind of get introspective and review how much faith and trust you have in this God that loves you so much. Take that time, evaluate that, and dig in with God in meditation and prayer, in reading his word, in spending time with him to develop that deep trust with him. Because you will not be disappointed. He always fulfills his promise. And I hope that encourages you to do. And if it does, if this encourages you and challenges you to really reevaluate your relationship with God, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Give it a like. Share it with somebody that you know. And then subscribe to the channel so you and I can continue to walk together through the scripture and grow as disciples together. Thank you so much for that opportunity today. As always, I'm Pastor David, and I'm out.